For over a century, Algeria was not just a colony of France, but an integral part of it. 3 entire departments of France were located on the North African coast. But this was a reality for only a fraction of its population. For the millions of Muslim Algerians, French rule was a story of subjugation, inequality, and stripped identity. This simmering tension was about to explode into one of the 20th century's most brutal wars of decolonization. Welcome, and today we're exploring the Algerian War of Independence. The story begins long before the first shots were fired in 1954. France conquered Algeria in 1830, and over the next century, European settlers, known as the Pieds Noirs, poured in. They seized the best land, dominated the economy, and controlled the political system. While they enjoyed the full rights of French citizens, the indigenous Muslim majority were relegated to second-class status. They were denied political representation, faced economic hardship, and saw their culture and language suppressed. After World War II, the winds of change were blowing across the globe. Empires were crumbling. In Algeria, nationalist sentiments that had been growing for decades began to coalesce. Early attempts at peaceful reform and political negotiation were repeatedly blocked by the powerful settler lobby, who were terrified of losing their privileged position. Frustration mounted. For a growing number of Algerian nationalists, it became clear that freedom would not be given, it would have to be taken. On November 1, 1954, a date now known as Red Toussaint or All Saints' Day, the newly formed National Liberation Front, or FLN, launched a series of coordinated attacks across Algeria. It was a declaration of war. Their goal was simple and absolute: complete independence from France. The French government, underestimating the FLN's resolve, responded with force, determined to crush what they considered a mere rebellion. They labeled the conflict as an event or an operation to maintain public order, refusing to even call it a war. The FLN's strategy was multifaceted. In the rugged mountains and countryside, they waged a classic guerrilla war, using hit-and-run tactics against the French army. In the cities, particularly the capital, Algiers, they launched a campaign of urban terrorism. Cafes, public places, and markets frequented by Europeans became targets. The goal was to make Algeria ungovernable, to sow fear, and to prove that French control was an illusion. This was the beginning of the infamous Battle of Algiers in 1957. The French response was equally, if not more, brutal. To counter the FLN, the French military was given extraordinary powers. They deployed elite paratroopers into the Kasbah of Algiers, the traditional Muslim quarter. Their mission was to dismantle the FLN's network at any cost. This led to a dark chapter of the war defined by mass arrests, systematic torture, and extrajudicial killings. The French doctrine of counterterrorism became a terrifying reality for thousands of Algerians. Suspects were rounded up, and methods like waterboarding and electrocution became routine in secret detention centers. While brutally effective in the short term, the French did manage to break the FLN's Algiers network. These tactics horrified many back in mainland France and tarnished the nation's reputation on the world stage. The war wasn't just fought in the streets and mountains. It was a psychological battle for hearts and minds. The FLN sought to unite the Algerian people, sometimes through coercion, eliminating rival nationalist groups and demanding loyalty from the population. The French tried to win over the Muslim population with social programs and promises of reform, a strategy called pacification, while simultaneously terrorizing them into submission. It was a conflict filled with contradictions and moral ambiguities on all sides. Entire villages were forcibly relocated into resettlement camps to cut off support for the guerrillas, uprooting millions of lives. Back in France, the war was tearing society apart. The initial public support for maintaining French Algeria began to wane as the conflict dragged on. The casualties mounted, and horrifying stories of torture leaked to the press. The war caused a deep political crisis. The government seemed powerless, and the constant instability led to the collapse of the Fourth Republic in 1958. In the midst of this chaos, France turned to one man, Charles de Gaulle. The World War II hero was brought back to power, seen as the only figure who could solve the Algerian crisis. Initially, the Pieds Noirs and the French army believed de Gaulle would guarantee that Algeria remained French forever. He even famously declared, "I have understood you," to a cheering crowd of settlers in Algiers. However, de Gaulle was a pragmatist. He quickly realized that a military victory was impossible and that holding onto Algeria was draining France's resources, soldiers, and international prestige. He began to slowly, cautiously, pivot towards a new policy, self-determination for Algeria. This perceived betrayal was met with fury by the hardliners. A faction of the French army and settler extremists formed a secret paramilitary group, the OAS, or Organisation de l'Armée Secrète. They unleashed a new wave of terror, not only against the FLN and Muslim civilians but also against the French government itself. They attempted to assassinate de Gaulle multiple times and launched bombings in both Algeria and mainland France, hoping to derail any move towards independence. The final years of the war saw descend into a three-way conflict: the FLN, the French army, and the OAS, with civilians caught tragically in the middle. Despite the violence, the path to independence was now irreversible. In March 1962, after long and difficult negotiations, the French government and the FLN signed the Avion Accords. The agreement called for a ceasefire and a referendum on Algeria's future. On July 1, 1962, the Algerian people voted overwhelmingly for independence. After 132 years of French rule and nearly 8 years of a devastating war, Algeria was finally a sovereign nation. The aftermath was painful and chaotic. The Declaration of Independence triggered a mass exodus of the Pieds Noirs. Within a few months, nearly 1 million settlers, who had known no other home but Algeria, fled to France, where they often faced a difficult and unwelcome reception. A terrible wave of reprisal killings also targeted the Harkis, the Algerian Muslims who had served as auxiliaries with the French army. They were seen as traitors by the victorious FLN, and tens of thousands were massacred, abandoned by the French government they had served. The Algerian War left deep and lasting scars. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of Algerians and tens of thousands of French soldiers lost their lives. The conflict exposed the brutal realities of colonialism and the violent, complex nature of liberation struggles. In France, the war remains a sensitive and often unspoken trauma, a war without a name for many years. It forced the nation to confront the dark side of its imperial past and redefine its own identity. For Algeria, independence was a hard-won victory, the culmination of a long and bloody struggle for freedom, but it was just the beginning of the long journey of building a new nation from the ashes of war. The Algerian War serves as a powerful reminder of how the quest for national identity and freedom can lead to immense sacrifice and profound transformation, shaping the destinies of two nations forever. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this history compelling, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you next time.